Today, I wanted to talk about the image of the African in the public space. I have noticed, going around Kenya and just looking at the images available to the public, that there is a trend to eliminate African images from the public sphere. And it is apparent that they, whoever they are determined to eliminate our images completely from the public space in Kenya. Now, by they, I mean the advertising agencies, most of which are owned and controlled by Indians and Europeans. And I wanted to focus specifically on the advertisements that are used to promote products. And these advertisements are found in billboards, they're found in newspapers, they're found on social media, and they're also found on the products themselves. And when you systematically analyze the use of these images, you will discover that they rarely use actual African images on advertisements in Kenya. They use foreign images. Number one, that's a problem because they're denying our models and actors jobs. And number two, they use mixed race people to represent African. In other words, there is a colorist discrimination at work here. It's the usual self-rejection by Africans. And this comes at an economic cost because they deny us those jobs. There are plenty of people who can be models, right? And they can make some money doing that. But when all these jobs are given to foreigners who are mixed race, it means they're denying our own opportunity. They're denying our people opportunity within this space. But that is the standard policy of the government of Kenya, to deny Africans opportunity or to deny Kenyans opportunities. Now, look at all these images. This is advertisement after advertisement after advertisement. And you will notice what I'm saying. They use mixed race people to represent Africans because our image apparently is not acceptable to be shown in the public, to push products. Now, who are these? When you look at the media sector, there's a specific part of the media that is called advertisement. And in advertisements and marketing, there are marketing companies. And these companies produce media. They produce actual content. They produce the ads. They produce the posters. These are called advertising agencies. Now, if you have a company or you have a product and you're trying to push and you're trying to do it professionally, you go to an ad agency and you tell them your vision and they produce an ad for you. They come up with a whole campaign. Now, these ad agencies are mostly owned by Europeans and Indians. When you study all of them, the overwhelming majority are foreign owned and they practice open discrimination against us. And there's no pushback from the Africans, as always, which is why I'm talking about this today. So you go to these ad agencies, you give them your vision, and they produce an ad. And in that ad, they will never use an actual African. They will use foreign images and mixed race people. They will never allow us to be on the products or to advertise products that are being sold in Kenya. And I find this to be completely outrageous. Now, you'd never suspect that there's a government in the country because you'd think that a government is there to represent the interest of its own population, but not the governments of Kenya. The coconuts that have been ruling this country since the 1960s don't see themselves that way. They see themselves fundamentally as Europeans or as British, so that they represent British interests or Western interests more than they represent our interests, because there should be quotas in law to force these people, these ad agencies, or any other industry, to mandate them to give opportunity to Africans or Kenyans. Because when they import these images of mixed race people to represent Africans, what that means is that they are denying our actors jobs. You know, the people who pose in these advertisements, that can be very lucrative, especially if you build up your name and your image. But when they import these images, they deny our people jobs. And they are paying for these images. These images are not necessarily free. And it's very disappointing to find that we can't get representation in our own public space. We are almost banned from our own country, from our own space. And just like the other video I did about books, like when you go to bookshops, you will almost never find Kenyan books. You'll find less than 2% of the shelf space being dedicated to Kenyan books. The market has been completely handed over to foreigners. It's foreigners who are supposed to benefit. So it is also in the image business. And the issue of images in the mass media is a very large topic, and I cannot hope to cover all of it in this video. But what we can say is that representation matters. Children and teenagers, they absorb a lot from the media, especially today. And when you discriminate against people who look like them, like growing up, we rarely saw people who looked like us on TV. We rarely saw our culture on TV. We rarely saw our foods on TV, our activities on TV, or anything that we could relate to on TV. Even then, the government would flood the mass media with foreign images and foreign movies. When you do a study of representation in Kenya in media, you'll discover that 95% or more of the population of Kenya is made up of Africans. But when you look at the media representation, you'll discover that almost 99% of the images in the media are non-African and non-Kenyan. We can rarely see ourselves on TV or in media. And the few programs that are produced by Africans who are Kenyans in Kenya do not portray our culture. They portray Western perversions, this time using Africans, right? It's the same Western garbage that is being offered up and forced down our throats by the media and the government, but this time using Africans. So we rarely get to see ourselves in media. And this also contributes to the self-hatred and self-rejection most children and young adults feel in Kenya, which is why bleaching chemicals have become very popular. So many women are bleaching their skin because they know ever since they were children that they are rejected. Because you'll never see ordinary Kenyans being represented positively on TV. Anytime they show Kenyans is when you're watching the news, and mostly it's negative information. It's usually not positive because news is overwhelmingly negative, right? And so when it's negative information, they bring Kenyans. When it's positive information, they bring non-Africans. They portray, as usual, the Mzungu, other foreigners as being almost godlike angels, right? And so representation matters. In Kenya, the government has normalized the dominance of the Mzungu image in the media. And this really crushes the self-esteem of most Africans, even when they are not aware of that. By systematically erasing African images everywhere in society, most of Africans in Kenya feel dislocated from their own country. They feel dislocated from themselves, which is why they really struggle to present themselves as foreigners. And the use of foreign images is everywhere, because even when you go to church, you'll find statues and cartoon paintings of Europeans that are presented as God, as angels, as saints, as everything good. You will never find the use of African images as deity. And so this has a terrible psychological toll on the people, and they may not even be aware of it, but it is a psychological warfare that is being waged by the government on its own population. Now, why would the government do that? Well, because it's the coconuts that took over. It's the brainwashed Africans that have been ruling Kenya from the 1960s. And the end point is to create a very docile population that never fights back against foreigners. In fact, the idea appears to create what is called historical amnesia within the bulk of the population, whereby they cannot remember anything negative that foreigners did to them. Otherwise, the economic structure will crumble. And the economic structure is all about foreigners owning all the assets of the country. When you look at every important business, every important asset within Kenya, it is owned by foreigners. In fact, foreigners own even lakes in Kenya. For example, Lake Magadi is owned by the Indians. So how did a bunch of Indians end up owning an entire lake from which Africans are banned? Right now, I dare you, drive to Lake Magadi, see whether you can access it. It is impossible if you're an African. It is owned by the Indians, and we are banned from it. So the economic structure is all about making sure that foreign interests make money and that we don't make money. It's always a money fight, okay? And the government is not here to represent our interests. It's here to represent foreign interests, Western interests. And so if you are to change the psychology of the population, then they would not be so passive. They would not be so docile. They'd be fighting back. They'll be raising these issues. But the psychological warfare that has been waged on the population has turned the men into women. Very docile, very passive, so that even when you hear right now, you're listening to me, right? And I'm telling you, Lake Magadi has been given and taken over by foreigners. It doesn't bother you at all. It doesn't. You don't mind being discriminated against within your own territory. Even when I complain that they're eliminating our images from the public sphere, it doesn't bother you at all, right? It doesn't bother you at all. It's always okay for you to be removed from your own country, from economic opportunities within your own territory. It doesn't bother you at all. In fact, you don't really mind being poor, because you wonder, how can they achieve such levels of poverty without a rebellion? How? How can you have half the population of the country being extremely poor and there's no rebellion? Half the city of Nairobi, in fact, I'd say 60% of the population of Nairobi lives in slums without rebellion. How come? How do you accomplish that? You simply wage psychological warfare on the population. You diminish them within their own brain. You eliminate them completely from their own mind, so that anytime they think, they never think of themselves as themselves. They always think themselves, and they see themselves as the foreigners see themselves. So they're able to accept a subservient position within their own country. That's how they pulled this off, and that's how they're able to sustain this third world economy, which is based upon foreign ownership of everything. Now, when you look at all these images, you can clearly see that there's a colorist discrimination going on by these ad agencies that are owned by Indians and Europeans. Even when you look at this blue band advertisement, you can see they have changed the color of the boy. The boy is an African boy, but they've changed the color so much that you can clearly see this colorist discrimination. When you look at the rest of these images, you can see over and over and over again that we are not welcome in the public sphere. Someone like me would never get an advertising role, ever. Why? Because my skin color is not what is deemed acceptable. Acceptable by who? By the ad agencies, which are owned by who? By the Indians and the Europeans. Because the general pattern in Kenya is that most Kenyans don't own anything. They don't own assets. Okay? So when you look at company after company after company, they all, I would say 95% of the economy is owned by non-Africans in Kenya. All the top billionaires in Kenya are generally non-African. Right? And so it is them who control everything within the economy, and we are not acceptable. Our image, at least, is not acceptable to be used within Kenya, which is why we say this is still a colonized country. When you look at it from that point of view, when the majority of your population doesn't own majority of the assets within your country, then it's not your country, is it? And so the politicians exist to support and to back the foreign interests. And I consider all non-Africans in Kenya to be foreigners. I don't care whether they were given citizenships or not. For me, they're still foreigners. It makes no difference, right? And so the foreign interest is the overwhelming interest that is protected by the political class in Kenya, which is why the politicians never complain when we are discriminated against, because they themselves discriminate against us because they don't consider themselves to be Africans, right? In conclusion, we can say that there's a cultural genocide that is being done in Kenya against the use of African images in the public space. Our position on earth is completely invalidated when they reject to use people like us in the public space. And I would say that we need a new rating system for everything in the mass media. And the rating system should be African friendly or African hostile. If the images that are being flooded on TV are hostile to us, we should have a rating for that. We should be able to tell people that the following movie is anti-African or anti-black. We also need African-centered programming, especially for young children. When it comes to children programming, it is overwhelmingly Western, mostly American, and it is very white supremacist. They push images and ideas of white supremacy, whereby the Europeans or the Mzungu is presented as a hero, as a god, as amazing, as all those positive attributes. And you hardly ever get to see African images or African stories being told when it comes to children programming. Now, we have a Ministry of Culture and Social Services or something like that, and you would think that they would, sponsor local artists to produce children programming that would be racially affirming to our children. But we know that that is not what the government will ever do, because the government is, not on our side. But at any rate, I still think that is something that can be done even by private interests, that we should seek to use more and more of our images and be aware that we are not welcome in the public sphere. And you should also make your voice heard. This passive thing whereby you say nothing is important, but generally nothing is important to Kenyans except a low battery notification on their phone. So it's very difficult to fight this fight when you have the bulk of the population not being interested in anything. I can not really tell you what Kenyans are interested in. The only thing I know they're interested in is whatever the Mzungu is doing. And so when you sit down with Kenyans and you listen, let's say you go to a bar and you're listening to a bunch of Kenyans talk, what would they be talking about? They would not be talking about this issue, right? They'd be talking about, well, did Arsenal defeat Manchester City? The focus is always on their master. They are never self-focused. And that's part of the reason why we cannot make a lot of progress in this country because the population